Hello, hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Can everyone see my screen? Yes, yes, good.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so just a couple, hopefully you've read my syllabus. A couple of quick points that I just want to point out to you is for whatever reason, if you can't come to this class, because we do meet, let's see, Mondays is going to be asynchronous. Wednesdays, obviously, it's going to be synchronous. And the way it's going to work is that I have a Monday class 449 that I lecture. So what I'm just going to do is after I get my video recording of that particular class, I'm just going to upload it on to both sites. It doesn't make sense to essentially do the same lecture twice, if that makes any sense. So you're not going to see the lecture for Monday until later on in the afternoon, because I think that lecture ends 5:30. You could also, by the way, if you want, and I don't know if your work schedule or class schedule or anything like that, but my other capstone class meets at 4 o'clock on Mondays. So you're more than welcome to, if you have time, to join that class on Mondays. And that's the class that I'm going to upload the video so you can watch it later on Monday. Or you can obviously, or you can just listen to the video recording or watch the video recording on Monday. And then, of course, come to the Wednesday class. So you guys are going to be a little bit ahead of my Monday class, at least in the beginning, because we have President's Day on, I think it's February 15th, right? If I remember my syllabus correctly, I think it's the 15th. Anyways, you guys are going to be ahead in the first few weeks, but eventually we're gonna catch up. So anyways, that's an option if you guys want to attend not only the Wednesday lecture, but also attending the Monday lecture. Because sometimes the attending the regular lecture, actually, some of you will perform better than just listening or watching the video of the lecture. For some reason, something gets lost in translation, or maybe you're more engaged when you know it's actually happening live. I don't know. There'll be studies done about Zoom teaching in the future, but there isn't that many yet. Anyways, what else? This is the textbook, so hopefully everybody can see this. This is full of all these case studies. It's the same textbook I used last semester, so if you have a friend that took the class last semester, you can ask them for a favor and say, hey, can I borrow it? Can I use it? So that way you don't have to spend any money on it. But if not, then you can buy it at the bookstore, or you can purchase this on through the Cognella website, which is on the syllabus. So this is the textbook. You're going to need it. If you've ever taken my classes, yes, I ask lots of questions from the readings, so you know you're going to need this. What else? What other point do I want to tell you before I actually start the lecture? Oh, again, if you've read the syllabus and the importance of being a good group member. So in this class, you're not going to have a bunch of weekly quizzes like my other classes that you've taken, or if you've taken my classes. like 346 or any of these other classes, I usually have weekly quizzes. In this class, no weekly quizzes. But there is group projects, and there are the case studies from this book that you're going to have to submit as assignments, and of course exams. So the importance of being a good group member is extremely important. Heck, if you guys want to work in entertainment or in communications, you need to be somebody who's amendable, who works well with others, because if you don't work well with others, it's going to be, you're going to have a tough go in entertainment, because entertainment stuff is most of the time it's these huge projects where it involves a lot of collaboration. So hopefully you're a good good team member, um, because I mean, not just last semester, but every semester, the groups that get along the best are the ones that win, right? They are the ones that produce the best work. The group members who don't get along or don't talk to one another or don't communicate, whatever, perform, generally speaking, worse. So you want to give your best effort as a group member, and don't want to get in trouble with your group members, and you certainly don't want to get in trouble with me, because if I have to kick you out of your group, you're not going to like what ends up happening to your grade. You will possibly fail the class, which unfortunately happens occasionally. So don't be that student. You'll hear that phrase from me occasionally. Don't be that student. So don't be that student. Mm, I'm already tired of talking, and I just started. Oh my God. So any questions? Oh, yes, there, if you complete the pre-test, that is extra credit, yes, Georgette. Yes, thank you for reminding me. Please complete the pre-test. Even if you don't know any of the answers, um, do the best you can. The university wants to assess your learning in what they call high impact classes or high impact practices. I think that's what it stands for, HIP. So in these HIP classes, they want to assess your learning in terms of, like, just say, so we give you a pre-test and we give you a post-test, and see how much you learned throughout the semester. And so it's a way of the university, again, of assessing learning learning outcomes, I guess. And so again, even if you don't know any of the answers, do the best you can, and then I'll offer extra credit again to complete the post test at the end of this, towards the end of the semester. So that's an easy way of accumulating extra credit points, because yes, there's extra credit opportunities in this class, whether it's attending ETC panels, and I think I mentioned on the syllabus something about the participating in the student forum, if I remember correctly. Anyways, any questions before I start the lecture?
Hi, I have a question. How many like group projects are we gonna be doing this semester?
Two,
This class? How
two,
many group projects are we gonna be?
two,
Me.
two.
Two. Okay, I thought you were saying who. Sorry, can't hear. Okay, thank you.
Two and who? I guess that sounds very similar. All right. Yes, two.
Thank you. Okay.
There was a question above asking if you were gonna select our groups, or were we going to?
No, I select your groups. Like life. You don't get to pick your coworkers. Other questions? So when it comes to the group selection, it's gonna kind of be, you know, luck of the draw in some ways. Um, so hopefully you get along with your group members. I honestly don't know many of you, so I know a few of you, but so when I put you into groups, I have no idea what the chemistry is going to be. I'm hoping for the best. No other questions? All right, so today we're going to talk about the Pestle and Swot analysis. Um, so this is what a pestle looks like. It's a good way of analysis in terms of thinking about how different segments of society is affecting your organization. So hopefully by the end of the semester, you are going to be an expert at being able to identify what is what. So when you're reading your case studies, and we'll talk about this in more detail, when you're going through your case studies, you're going to have to be able to identify, okay, this is political, this is economic, this is social cultural, this is technology, this is legal, and this is environmental. So most of your case studies are going to have at least 5 of these elements. The environmental part is sort of hit and miss for most of these cases, for some of the case studies, I shouldn't say all. But for the other 5 segments, you should have something in there that fulfills the category of political or economic or social or technology or legal. And so that's going to be an important part of doing your case studies for your assignments. And we'll talk about the SWOT a little bit later because you're going to have to be able to intertwine the SWOT with the pestle, and we'll talk about that later. But this is what I mean by a pestle analysis. Sometimes it's called or known as a pestle situational analysis. So political, let's talk about that first, the P part. So the P is what are the industry's current lobbying efforts? And usually this centers around trade organizations or it centers around unions. And oftentimes, right, the reason that organizations lobby is so they can get favors, right, from the government. So whether that means, so for instance, that's talking to Congress or people who are working on the committee for trades to say, hey, can you please see if you can get China to lower tariffs on our goods because we want to send more movies or more video games or whatever to this particular country. Let's say it's China or whatever country. And so lobbying, usually there's an exchange, right? Usually the industry gives politicians money. So in terms, the politicians do them a favor, politically speaking, or economically speaking, politically and economically speaking. So another example of this would be, for instance, this is an example of also political.
My fellow
That's a
Americans,
political
this
video.
morning, our nation is overcome with shock, horror, and sorrow. This weekend, more than 80 people were killed or wounded in two evil attacks. The shooter in El Paso posted a manifesto online consumed by racist hate. In one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. These sinister ideologies must be defeated. Hate has no place in America, and we must stop the glorification of violence in our society. This includes the gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace. It is too easy today for troubled youth to surround themselves with a culture that celebrates violence. We must stop or substantially reduce this, and it has to begin immediately. We must make sure that those judged.
Okay, so obviously, former President Donald Trump, right, is being critical of the video game industry. So obviously, if you're the video game industry and you heard this message from the president, that's not good, obviously. And so at that point in time, the ESA is probably going to send some representative to speak to somebody in Congress and say, hey, can you please talk to the president and you know have him not be so critical of our industry. We're doing XYZ to try to prevent this from happening. And again, they're sort of lobbying so the president or whoever is not being critical of them. So that's an example of political. And so occasionally in these case studies, right, you're going to read examples, or there might be an example of government being critical of an industry that's political. So another example of political is a company asking for something from the national, state, or local government or some other organization. So an example of that would be, for instance, recently, right, Disney and the other amusement parks in the state of California have been lobbying or were lobbying uh, Governor Newsom to reopen the parks, right? They're pointing out the fact that, a lot of people are potentially going to lose their jobs or did lose their jobs, and it's having a huge economic impact on the industry. And so they're essentially lobbying, trying to convince Governor Newsom, right, the state government, to open up the theme parks and amusement parks throughout the state of California. So that would be an example of obviously lobbying for state government. Let's just say that your organization wants to build, let's say, a stadium, right? We obviously have this beautiful stadium that's nobody's really gone to over here in Inglewood. And so the owners, whoever's building the venue, needs to be working with the local government in this particular case. So in the case studies you might read, or you might run across where the company's asking for something from, the national government, maybe the state government, maybe local government, maybe heck, it could be international government. So pay attention to that when you're reading the case studies. When you're reading the case studies as well, don't forget about office politics. Office politics, is immensely important. And as you know, if any of you work in an office, it's very important that you get along with the folks that you work with. It's part of office politics. You don't want to be the loner or the outcast, and otherwise, going to work is going to be miserable. Of course, now in the era of Zoom or working from home, it's not as big of a deal, but nevertheless, you're going to read in the case studies examples of office politics. So please make note of that. Also make note of things like meetings. Anytime you have these big, powerful CEOs that are meeting with one another, Mike, these folks are incredibly powerful, and they're incredibly busy. They're running these, multi-million dollar um, companies. Then they're just not going to meet with people just to meet with them, right? There's a reason why, let's say the head of Fox is going to meet with the head of Disney. They're just not meeting just to have a glass of wine and chit chat. I mean, maybe, possibly, but generally speaking, there's other reasons they're meeting besides just enjoying a glass of wine, right? Or a glass of whiskey or whatever it is that they drink or eat. So there's something political involved, generally speaking, in these meetings. So make note of that. Also make note of the fact that think about how your organization responds to criticism, right? So let's just say that you're being critiqued, not only by the government, but let's just say let's say you're being critiqued by filmmakers or some sort of artist. And so how does the organization respond to this criticism? This is where, it's a little political is also sort of PR-ish in this respect. So is there any questions on things to be looking out for when you're reading the case studies and you're trying to find examples of political? Okay, so let's move on to the next component, which is, I was going to show you this one, but this maybe we can skip this one. E for economic. So economic is how will the current economy affect your organization's pricing of its goods or services. So you take into account, for instance, how much disposable income do people have? Disposable income. What is consumer spending like? So in other words, you take into account, well, how much do consumers typically spend on these types of goods and services? You take into account the idea of taxes. You take into account inflation, like how much inflation is going on in a particular country. So generally speaking, if you don't know what I mean by inflation, inflation usually means that how much can you buy with your money, right? So if there's more inflation in your country, that means you can buy less. If the inflation is less, you can buy more with your money. So for instance, I know that they're talking about it, they already did the idea of raising the minimum wage, I think to $15. Anyways, so that's cool and that's great, but if inflation skyrockets, it doesn't really mean much because those $15 are still not going to be able to buy much of anything because of inflation. You also take into account things like unemployment, right? So right now, obviously, because we're in this, crisis, the COVID crisis, and so a lot of you, or a lot of people, not just you, have either gotten their hours reduced or heck, have gotten laid off, unemployment. So you take into account the unemployment rates. And so for example,
On Investor Day, we did anticipate some kind of a bundle, and the $12.99 is a coincidental price, I assure you.
This certainly will get consumers' attention. It's affordable, and it's really attractive to a very wide group of consumers.
With the right to get Hulu under their control, they got the right to take Hulu international. play the real game Netflix is playing, which is a big global game, which is where the big multiple hundreds of millions of subs lie.
Okay, so is it really a coincidence that Disney's charging $12.99, basically the same price that Netflix is charging its customers? I mean, is it really truly a coincidence that Disney decided, oh, well, $12.99, it's a good price?
No, it's not a coincidence, but it's really funny the way he said it in the interview and, and kind of smirked.
Right, right. It's there's no way. I mean, they're using some of the pricing, the modeling from Netflix, since Netflix is the first in the really the big monster in the marketplace, although Amazon is catching up. And so, yeah, it's not a coincidence. There's a reason why they decided that $12.99 is a good deal. They're probably looking also for to try to convince people to switch, right? Probably switching from Netflix over to Disney Plus. That's my guess. Yes, definitely correct, Alexis. Definitely. Georgette, yes, they are. Netflix has actually, I know they were talking about going up. I don't even know. I'm a Netflix member. I don't even know if that's true. Yes, okay, yeah, that's true. But I did hear that they were going up, but to $14.99 or $15.99 just for the streaming services only. I'm not sure when that's going to kick in. I'm sure I'm going to eventually see it on my checking account going, oh, it is 15 already? Oh, I didn't even know. Man, I'm out of the loop. So anyway, so I guess Netflix now increased their rates to $15.99. So that being said, Disney for sure in the near future is probably also going to raise their rates to something like $15.99, my guess, just so they can maximize their profit. Oops. So anyways, anytime you see things that center around money, oftentimes money in the case studies, numbers, don't ignore those. Those oftentimes can be part of the economics. I know you guys are comm majors and you hated math or you hated business or you hated accounting, and that's why you're in comm. Stereotype. Sometimes true, sometimes not. But don't ignore the numbers, okay? Because the numbers are telling you part of the story, especially when you're reading the case studies. So don't ignore those. Now, also anything that has to do with the rising cost to develop and acquire content that's going to affect your organization. So the cost of producing content keeps going up. The reason being is because generally speaking, the price or the cost to acquire big name talent, whether that's a well-known writer, a well-known director, producer, actor, those fees keep going up. So the cost to develop and or acquire content keeps going up. And so think about how it's going to affect your organization. In the case of, as some of you already pointed out, the Netflix is now charging $15.99. I'm pretty sure that has to do with the fact that Netflix is spending an enormous amount of money in producing its own content and not only just licensing, but that's one of the reasons probably why they had to raise their costs or their subscription fees to $15.99, if that's the case. I have to double check, because their costs are going up. And so pay attention to that. Is the current industry growing? And that's a big question. And right now, obviously, in the age of COVID, some industries are doing really well, right? Economically speaking, because we're kind of forced to consume entertainment in our homes. So something like Netflix, which is streaming, Disney Plus, anything that has to do with streaming right now is, at least when it comes to movies or television programming, is going well. Other industries are probably not doing so well. So, for instance, the theme park industry, certainly in California, not doing so well. Live music, certainly not doing as well. Sports, at least when it comes to live, the gate, not doing as well. So pay attention to the case studies in terms of like, is the current industry growing? Yes or no? Will the rising costs of advertising affect your organization? Generally speaking, social media can be a way to lower your advertising costs if you really know how to use social media very strategically and very well. The problem with social media is that it's hard. It's hard to stand out in social media when you have all these messages coming at you, right? So so yes, maybe social media can work in your favor, but if you're trying to do traditional advertising and traditional media, like let's say on network television or cable TV or radio or something else that's more traditional, it generally speaking costs more, traditionally speaking, because it's harder to stand out, traditionally speaking. So how is that going to affect your industry? So pay attention to anything that has to do with the rising cost of advertising. Ah, yes. I miss live music as well. I live I miss anything live. Heck, I miss going to the gym, for God's sakes. So anyways, pay attention to that as you're reading your case studies. Um, Pay attention to anything that mentions the global economy and that's going to affect your organization. So for instance, you might read a case study that talks about Netflix, right? And so Netflix is doing this global expansion. And so, you know, they are impacted by how well the economy is doing in that particular country. And so that's the danger of when you are going global, you are sort of, it's out of your hands in terms of like how that a country is operating economically speaking. So please pay attention to these. My personal advice to you as you're trying to like read through these case studies, what I would do if I was a student, like I do it now as a professor, I just as I'm reading the case studies, I do P, okay, that's political, and I put a little P there next to it. I put a little E next to the what I think is economic or what I know is economic. I put a little S next to social cultural or SC, and so that's the way I tackle it as I am going through the case studies. That would be my advice to you as you're reading through these. Well, I think in the near future, the live events are not going to be the same, at least in the near future. Oh, cool. Oh, why did they stop him, Jacob? Oh, I don't think he can hear me. Okay, so moving on to social cultural. So this is the S. or SC. So how will the demographic shifts affect your business? So as you're reading the case studies, think about if there's anything that centers on demographics. So is the audience getting younger, or is it the audience getting older? Is there some sort of shift when it comes to uh, racial and ethnic diversity, and how is that affecting your business? So for instance, right now there is a push, obviously, as we become more diverse, right? Um, in terms of racially and ethnically, there is this sort of this, not even sort of, there is a push to make the actors that we're seeing um, represent the diversity that we see in real life. And so how is that going to affect, let's say, the television industry or the streaming industry or the movie industry moving forward, with this sort of like this push to have more diversity on screen? So think about that as you're reading your case studies. What are the geographic changes? Oh, wow, interesting. So what are the geographic changes? So for instance, do you guys know, is California losing folks right now, or are people still coming to California? Do you guys know? Or do you folks know? Yes, you're right. We are actually losing folks. I think that, yes, Georgette, a lot of them are leaving to the Southwest. I don't know about Florida, but they're definitely leaving to places like Texas, and definitely moving to places like Nevada, Arizona. And so they're moving to the Southwest. So how is that going to affect businesses moving forward? The fact that we have here in California, which, it's still the most populous state in the United States, but we are actually losing folks. And so they're moving to other places. How's that going to affect businesses, or our business, or your business moving forward? How will behavioral changes affect your business? So, yes. And so, for instance, the idea of, it used to be when I was a young person and I used to work, they would give us 1 week off, right? And if you're lucky, 2 weeks off. And generally speaking, what I remember doing when I was a young person, like your age, I would say, oh, I'm taking that whole week off and I'm going to go to Puerto Vallarta, or I'm going to go to Cancun, or whatever. And so I would just take that whole week off, and that I would use up all my vacation days for that one vacation, and that's it. And so what they're discovering is that you guys, your generation, and I guess the younger millennials as well, is that you are being much more strategic when it comes to your vacations. In other words, you guys are saying or thinking to yourself, which, by the way, I think this is so much smarter. I wish I was that smart when I was your age. You're thinking to yourself, okay, Labor Day, 3-day weekend. I'm taking the Friday off, and I'm going to have a 4-day mini vacation in September. And so you identify these days off that happen throughout the year, and you take an additional day off, right, either before or after that day. And so you have all these mini vacations that are broken up throughout the year. So that's one thing that's happening. Unfortunately, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but we are still one of the few places in the world where we actually don't even use up all our vacation days. A lot of us don't even use them up for whatever reason. For me, I'm kind of puzzled still by that. If I had 6 days of vacation, trust me, I'm using all of them. So anyways, I think that's really smart. The fact that you guys break up your vacations, I think that's actually brilliant. Anyways, so also brands. A lot of the power that brands had over young folks is also diminishing, or at least it seems to be diminishing. So you know, the idea of you being able to sell something just because it says Disney doesn't quite have the same cachet that it used to have with previous generations. So you guys are much more critical of brands and just don't, you know, aren't necessarily like so passive and sheep-like when it comes to brands. And by the way, also a good thing, I think. It's a good change. So anyways, how is that going to affect your business, knowing that young folks, you know, aren't in love with brands as much as they used to be? What is the media saying about your organization, and how is that impacting your organization? So you might run across something like this in your case studies, maybe. Certainly what you might run across in your case studies is what are the pop culture trends? In other words, you know, who are the big stars? Um, who are the popular musicians? What's popular right now in our society? So you might run across that in your case studies. So pay attention to that as well. One last thing is, yes, you're right, Georgette. You guys are way more, well, seem to be more critical when it comes to doing your homework, when it comes to buying stuff, which is good. What are people's buying habits? That's also part of social cultural. So for instance, we know that you guys are, well, we, not just you guys, all of us folks are buying streaming services, right? Whether it's you're doing the Disney Plus, whether in Netflix, and heck, maybe you're also doing Amazon. But what you're doing also is that you're getting rid of cable. The idea of cable is no longer, some of you may not even know what cable is, in terms of you may have never been a subscriber to cable ever in your entire life. Or maybe you were a cord shaver, meaning that you didn't find the need to have a package with HBO or Showtime or these other premium cable channels, and decided, I'm cutting those. I'm just focusing on the basic packages. So you're cord shaving, or you're a cord cutter, or a cord never. So cord cutter meaning that obviously you just decided, I'm getting rid of it. I don't like cable anymore. I've gotten rid of it. And so when you're reading the case studies, pay attention to what are people's buying habits. So any questions on S? Okay, moving on to T. So how will technological changes affect your business? This is very similar to the buying habits when it comes to the fact that people are now preferring to buy streaming versus getting rid of cable. And that largely happened because we now have the technological capability to stream content, and not just streaming the content, but also having good visual quality of the content. And so technological changes that are happening within society, pay attention to that. Are they having issues with privacy because of technology? Because one of the great things about being able to stream is that, yes, you can get access to it very easily, but you can also, companies have the issue with piracy, right? The fact that, you know, people are getting the stream for free. This is a big issue. If you pay attention to, let's say, the UFC, where Dana White has been trying to essentially stem or reduce the number of people who are pirating their pay-per-views, which is hurting the organization's bottom dollar. The rising cost of production. How is that going to change the industry? So for instance, one of the things that was essentially the technology of movies, a 3D, for instance, having the 3D capability for some movies raises the cost of production. For instance, and anytime you introduce more technology, brand new technology into whether it's motion pictures or TV or whatever, it's going to raise the cost of the content. And then also pay attention to the internet infrastructure. Some of the case studies might mention things like, oh, the internet infrastructure in this country is not so good. That's technology. And so pay attention to that when you're reading your case studies. Some of the case studies may or may not mention the idea of patent. What's the patent lifestyle? So obviously, if you control the patent, it's going to affect your business, hopefully in a positive way. If you don't control that patent, your competitor does. Obviously, it's going to affect your patent in probably in a negative way. So anyways, is this patent life cycle at the beginning or at the end of the life cycle? I'm trying to remember the different patents, but I believe one patent lasts 15 years, a different kind of patent lasts 20 years. And so is it at the beginning of the 15-year cycle or 20-year cycle, or is it at the end? Are there any competing technologies on the horizon that's going to possibly affect your business? So pay attention to these technologies, or when they mention technologies in your case studies. Is that true? I didn't know that. Is The Mandalorian really the most pirated show? Interesting. So, so think about again, technology and how it's impacting your business. And so pay attention to that. Legal. Are there any legal changes, whether it's federal or state cases that may affect your business? So in either a positive or a negative way. So please pay attention to that. So for example, let me give you an example of what I mean by legal, by state and federal cases. And this is kind of an old case, but there's an old case that centers on baseball. It's called Major League, I think it's Major League Baseball versus the Federal League. I don't know if to talk about this in your comm law class, but anyways, the Supreme Court ruled in this particular case, they ruled in favor of Major League Baseball, essentially won the case because they were being sued by a competitor. And basically the courts said that baseball could operate as a monopoly because baseball did not represent interstate commerce. So I don't know how they concluded that, because you obviously have teams crossing state lines and they're playing games, and they're obviously that's commerce. But according to the courts, they said no, that was not commerce. It was just simply entertainment. So anyways, essentially baseball can operate like a monopoly, and and the courts don't do anything about it. So that's an example. That, by the way, that court case is about, I think it's actually 100 years old now. So, but this is the reason why baseball can operate as a monopoly in the United States. So, is there any current laws in place that affect your business? So, any current FCC rules? So, for instance, obviously, I think one of the things that hurts network television when it comes to trying to compete against streaming services like Netflix or Amazon or any of these other streaming services is that the networks have to operate under rules, right? In terms of like what they can show in terms of their content, in terms of curse words they can use in terms of their content. And And so I think that hurts them in some ways when they're competing against, Netflix or Amazon or heck, even HBO, where they can say and just pretty much do whatever they want because they're not regulated in terms of content by the FCC. So think about laws that affect your business. In this, in some of the case studies, you might read something about copyright laws. Pay attention to that. Pay attention to trademark laws. So, for instance, there is a case study. I'm not sure when you're going to read it. That where Disney is sort of negotiating with the Chinese government and trying to get the Chinese government to drop the hammer a little bit more on trademarks is one of the critiques that politicians have, and not just politicians here in the United States, but a lot of folks have a lot of complaints about China, and one of the big complaints is that they just don't have very strict trademark laws and copyright laws, and they essentially they take our marks and they use them for their own businesses and those sorts of things. And so Disney was essentially asking, "Okay, can you crack down on trademark infringement and copyright infringement in China so we can sell our products in China?" So pay attention to that when you're reading about legal. Oh my God, my vocal cords are already shot. Anyways, is there any pending mergers that need legal approval that may affect your business? Obviously, a big one just happened fairly recently was the fact that Disney was able to buy big chunks of Fox, and in a previous era, let's say prior to 1980, I don't think that the courts would have allowed it. They would have said no. Disney's going to accumulate too much power in the industry. We're not going to allow it. But obviously, we're now in the year 20. I think this happened. I think it was finally approved in 2019, maybe 2020. Anyways, the point being is that the newer courts are much more laissez-faire about mergers, and so even though they do go through the courts and then they do have to sort of essentially study it, a lot of times these mergers are approved. So again, think about how that affects your business, whether it's Disney's business or companies trying to compete with Disney. Is there any current lawsuits that may affect your business? So whether that's Disney suing Governor Newsom to open up the parks here in California, I don't know if that's really true. Just throwing that out there. Whether it's, a specific artist who's suing Spotify or suing whatever organization, how is that going to affect your business moving forward? Also think about, and this is not on the slide, think about contracts that are signed. So contracts that are signed are also legal because anytime you sign a contract, right, it becomes a legal binding document between yourself and this other party, whoever that party happens to be. So pay attention to the legal. The last of the E is environmental. So E, what are some environmental issues that could affect your business? So pollution would be one. Right now, most of these big media conglomerates have some sort of green program, so they can try to reduce the amount of pollution that they're sending out to the environment. There's issues with over tourism, where essentially you take a place that used to be pristine because of over tourism, it's no longer pristine. As a matter of fact, it's now highly polluted. That's always a business that could always affect your business, because anytime you have over tourism, and let's just say you're a hotel chain, or let's say that you have a business, let's say like a scuba diving business or a snorkeling business or anything like that. Generally, if you have too much tourism, usually leads to pollution, which typically means that it's going to hurt your business eventually, because, what's the point of going into the water if it's, full of trash? So think about new energy sources that could affect your business, like the idea of solar, for instance, or air, using air as an energy source. What are the current? I already mentioned what are your current company's current recycling or green solutions. And an example could be, for instance, nowadays, what a lot of sports industry, sports arenas are built, or I should say, people who build venues, not necessarily sports venues, but venues nowadays. A lot of them are now sort of like trying to be energy efficient venues. So in the case study, if you read anything that has to do with like energy efficient venues, that's part of the environment. And also think about international and local government pressure. So for instance, in the state of California, there is sort of like pressure coming from the state government to try to get companies to reduce the amount of pollution they're releasing into the air. Obviously, if there's also international pressure coming from various organizations targeting specific countries, trying to get them also to reduce the amount of pollution that they're releasing into the environment. And so think about that. Don't forget the climate as part of the environment. So if you read anything that has to do with climate, that's part of the environment. And so don't forget that. So as you're reading your case studies, right, again, jot down, again, this is what I do, little p or big P, E, S, T, so on and so forth. Any questions so far when it comes to the pestle? All right, now the SWOT. Oh, we have a question, maybe. No, okay, no question. Oh, that's a good question, Georgette. Most of the categories will be fulfilled. So for most of the case studies, you should have 5. The one that's going to be hit and miss is going to be the environment. The environment's not always, they're not going to mention anything has to do with anything with the environment. But I would say, I don't remember the number. I would say maybe half don't have anything to do with the environment or mention the environment in any way, shape, or form. So when you're doing the pestle, I'm glad you asked this question. It's not implied, okay? It's what they actually say. So don't think, oh, it's implied here, and I'm going to write this down. It's not implied. Write it down. Okay. Questions? No other questions? Okay, so for the SWOT, the S. So strength is characteristics of the business or project that give it an advantage over competitors. So you got to think about the strength as the SWOT as something that the actual company does better than others, right? So for instance, the idea, let's say Disney, right? Disney, for the most part, has an advantage over its competitors in the theme park industry because actually Disney controls its IP, intellectual property, where other competitors, let's say like Universal, for instance, may not control the IP. Like Harry Potter is not a Universal product, right? I believe it's a Warner Brothers product, so they don't control the IP. And so, anyways, intellectual property, and so that gives it a huge advantage over its competitors. And it's something that they do better than others, right? The fact that they can control their IP. So again, think about what the organization controls. It's what they can control internally. So it's internal and controls. And then weaknesses, right? Characteristics of the business or project that places it at disadvantage with competitors. So again, it's internal. So again, as I mentioned with Universal, one of the big disadvantages that Universal has in terms of trying to compete with Disney in the theme park industry is that it doesn't control its IP, or it hasn't developed an intellectual property that's as popular as Mickey Mouse, right? For instance. And so this is obviously something that Universal needs to improve upon. And so think about what the organization needs to improve upon. And again, it's in the control of the organization. The organization already knows that it needs to work on this, right? So for instance, another example, using you folks as an example, some of you might say, oh, I'm a bad test taker. And I think most of the time it's in your head. But anyways, really, for the most part, generally speaking, if you perform poorly on tests, not always, is that you're not spending enough time actually studying, right? Going through your notes, or you're not doing, you're not studying the right way. Trust me, as a student who used to be like, a C student, it actually took me dating somebody who was actually an A student, and I realized, oh, I've been doing this all wrong all along, and she taught me how to study. And so you figure out, oh, there's a distinct way that A students study versus C students. So anyways, realizing that you can control it, you can adopt those behaviors, and then also become a better student. So any questions about that? The idea of weaknesses that you can control? Okay, now where it gets a little more tricky is external, right? So think about elements in the marketplace that your business or project can take advantage of. It's external. So for instance, let's see, what would be an example? Well, the streaming industry is booming, right? More of us are preferring to stream our content rather than having it on cable. And so this is an advantage. This is the reason that Disney got into the streaming business, because they're like, well, we have all this IP, it's popular, people seem to be streaming, why don't we just also stream? Even though they're getting into the streaming business late, they saw an opportunity in the marketplace and they jumped at it. So that's an opportunity. Threat. A threat is something that could be possibly threatening or cause trouble for your business. It's external. So for instance, eventually, right, hopefully soon, I don't know when, because I really miss going to the movies. I love going to the movies. The movie industry is going to face a huge threat when they open up their doors again, and that threat is coming from streaming. And so how will the movie industry be able to compete with this other industry that is going to be in direct competition with them moving forward? Because I think one of the things that we've gotten used to or accustomed to now is the idea of not going to the movie theater to watch, our Marvel movie, that we would just rather sit at home and watch it on our own TV. And so will we change our behaviors again once the theaters open up again? I don't know. And that's the threat, right? The threat is, it could cause trouble for that industry moving forward. They don't know. Nobody really knows. And so, so again, think about threats. How much time do I have? 7 minutes. Okay, so, oh, I'm not going to talk about this. So one of the things that you're going to have to, I'll talk about the case studies on Monday. So I'll watch that on video. So one of the things that you have to do when you're doing the pestle and the SWOT is you have to intertwine it, right? So, and what I mean by that is you're going to write something down that's political, right? Let's just say that there's something like a government hearing in Congress where they critiqued the comic book industry. Okay, so they're critical of the comic book industry. And that's something that's so obviously if they're having a hearing in Congress, that's political. And so you need to, like, once you write that sentence out, you need to think to yourself, okay, is this a strength? Is this a weakness? Is this an opportunity? Or is this going to be a threat? And so at the end of that sentence in parentheticals, right, you would write down an S, a W, an O, or a T. So what would it be if they were having a hearing in Congress? Yes, Georgette, that would be a threat. And why is it a threat? You're right, it is a threat, but why is it a threat? Anybody? Yes, they're critiquing them. Yes, yes. The critiquing part is all correct, but you're missing one important part. So why is this a threat? Besides critiquing, there's kind of two parts. Yes, has the power to control things. At times, yes. So Georgette and Alexis, since you're the only two that's posted anything, does the comic book industry have any control over what's being said or what the government's going to do? Right, no. So that makes it the threat. It's external, right? They have no control over what's being done. It's outside of their control. It's taking place outside of their building. They have no control over what the government's going to do. They have no control over what this person is going to say. They have no control. It's external. So the external part is what makes it a threat. So as you're going through the pestle and intertwining it with the SWOT in these case studies, and you at the end of the sentence you put down just in parentheticals again, just SWOT, and so you need to think about, okay, can they control this? Is it internal or is it external, outside of their control? That's going to determine whether it's going to be what part of the SWOT it's going to be. And so another example, one more example before I let you guys go and enjoy your day. So signing a contract with another party, is that a strength, weakness, opportunity, or threat? Let's just say it's Netflix and they sign a licensing deal with Universal so they can get Universal stuff on Netflix, since Disney's saying no to them now. Okay, opportunity, opportunity, opportunity. So now, do they have any control on who they sign a contract with? So is it really external? No, it's more internal, correct. So would it be a strength or a weakness? Yeah, it might be a strength or it might be a weakness, but generally speaking, you're gonna sign a partnership with people who you think are gonna help you out with, right? It's like think about dating, right? When you decide to have a commitment with somebody, you're gonna try to hopefully decide to have a relationship with somebody who you think is gonna be advantageous for you to be with, as opposed to hurting you, right? So yeah, so if you let's just say it's Universal and there's Netflix is signing a deal with Universal, it's going to be a strength. It's not outside of their control, right? They do have a say in terms of who they're signing deals with. Correct. So if it's internal, it's either a strength or a weakness. So right, or that's external, it's either an opportunity or a threat. Correct. So, for instance, in some of the case studies you're going to run across, you're going to see that an organization signed a deal, right, with another company, another party, and sometimes it turned out to be a great deal for them. That's a strength. And then sometimes turned out to be a terrible deal for them. That would be a weakness because, I mean, nobody forced them to sign that deal per se, and they signed it. Ended up being a bad decision. Of course, in everything in hindsight, you have the benefit of 2020. Oftentimes you don't know how those deals are going to work out. So does that make sense in terms of when you intertwine the pestle with the SWAT, pay attention to the what is the internal and what's the external? Well, sometimes, Luke, it's no, in the case studies itself, Luke, it's going to actually tell you if it was a bad deal or not. It tells you. Generally speaking, it tells you. Now, of course, if you're looking at merger deals or deals that are happening right now, it's way too soon to tell because, well, they just happen. But in the case studies, sometimes, although most of the case studies are pretty new, when they talk about their history part, they usually make references. This was a good deal. This is a bad deal. So pay attention to that. The other thing that I would do, the second part to putting down P, E, or S on the pestle is next to it. I would put down, okay, this was a strength, this was a weakness, this was an opportunity, or this is a threat. So that way, one more thing when it comes to doing your pestle, you don't need to put down like 6 or 7 things per category. You can just do one example of political, one example of economic, and move on. You don't need to do like 6 or 7 per category or 3 or 4. Just need one. And so, as I always tell my students, if I'm just asking for one, just do one, because the more you put down, the more likely you might get one wrong. So you're actually hurting yourself by putting more down. Does that make sense? All right, so folks, it's exactly I've actually gone over by 3 minutes. It's at least according to my clock, it's 12:48. So yeah, I mean, I'm assuming Discord is like a discussion room, right? So, yeah, yeah. If you guys want to join Discord and have a discussion, I mean, you certainly can do that. That's fine. I have no issues with that at all. Go for it. Do it. The more you talk to one another and the more you have a community with one another, the better off you will be. I think it's a good idea. If I was a student, I would join whatever group I I could. Yes, because we can't meet for face to face. I think it's a good idea. Or you can also just post stuff on the student forum if you want as well. I think the way it works, you create a username and you just log in, I believe. Angela, some of the students have explained this to me, and I think that's the way it works. Oh, okay. I don't know that. But I do encourage everyone to use the hyperlink that Alexis is using, providing everybody. So if you guys want to have your own, discussion in your own chat rooms, you're more than welcome to do that. So again, so for Monday, remember that you're not going to see the lecture until the evening, because you're going to see Monday's lecture for my other capstone class. And again, if you can't attend that class at 4 o'clock on Monday, you are more than welcome to join that class. If you prefer the live interaction and chatting with other folks versus just hearing my voice on video, I think this is probably better. But again, I don't know your work hours, and so I know you're all really busy taking other classes and all those sorts of things. Yes, Jesse, it's at 4 o'clock on Monday. So again, you're more than welcome to join that class. It's the same number. So I set it up for both of you having the same IDs because I felt that would be easier if you guys wanted to join that group. I'm sure you guys are already inundated with all sorts of Zoom meeting ID numbers.